Great, David. Why don't I kick it off to you to give the intro?
Okay, ready. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our conversation with our invited guest, Congresswoman Annie Kuster. I am David Orgaz, the National Association of Realtors Federal Political Coordinator to Congresswoman Kuster, and I'm a realtor with Better Homes and Gardens, the Massiello Group in Keene. I'll begin by making a few brief announcements in the format of this hour and introduce our guests. 5 realtor boards and their members, lying entirely or partly within the 2nd Congressional District, have been invited to join in and are encouraged to enter questions you may have by clicking the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. As the host, I have several real estate related questions for Congresswoman Kuster, and then we'll go to questions from our invited guests and our board members and anyone who enters them into the chat. I'd like to welcome some board presidents. When I say your name, please say hello and your board location. I'd like to introduce Dean DeShane.
Hi, I'm Dean. We are the Kentucky Valley Board of Realtors down in the Monadnock region.
Thank you, Dean. Bob Bernard.
Hi, I'm the president of the Monadnock Board of Realtors out of Keene area.
Thanks you. And Bill Kennedy is sitting in as president-elect for Greater Claremont. Bill?
That's correct. Good morning, ma'am. Greater Claremont Board of Realtors.
Good morning. How are you, Bill?
We also invited Sunapee and the Upper Valley. Their presidents and elects are also on vacation, but hopefully a lot of their board members or membership, general membership, is joining in. I'd like to introduce 2 other guests. Joe Harris is on here, and Joe is National Association of Realtors Director of Federal Legislative and Political Affairs and helps craft NAR's federal policy while leading our advocacy efforts among House Democrats on Capitol Hill. Hi, Joe. Want to say hello?
Much more importantly, Dave, one thing that all of your members should know is that Joe, we're not supposed to have favorites, but Joe is my favorite government relations advocate in Washington. He's just a really great person. And I have some words to eat on Joe's behalf publicly, not to make the call political, but he was the one that told me that Joe Biden would be the Democratic nominee. And I told him that Joe Biden was struggling in the New Hampshire primary and was going to come in 5th. And Joe was not daunted by that information. He knew a little something about South Carolina and Jim Clyburn. Anyway, Joe, I'm very, very excited and particularly excited about Kamala Harris. So
absolutely.
I'll offline on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for being here, Congresswoman. You've been a great friend personally and a great friend to our industry and our organization over the years. Such a great independent thinker, hard worker, and your door is always open to us. And you know, it's I think we get spoiled with you because that is not the normal on Capitol Hill. Most folks have great difficulty getting access or getting into the front door of these congressional offices, but you and your staff are just tremendous. So
Joe has me on speed dial.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will add about Joe Biden, I knew being from South Carolina that was going to be the first test for any of these nominees. And it's fine to do well early on, but I think that Jim Clyburn had an oversized influence on this particular election. But anyway.
Well, he made him a much better candidate. You know, taking him to the woodshed really worked.
Yeah, I know.
I want to know what he said.
None of us will ever know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, I'll turn it back over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I'd also like to introduce Christian Hoysrad. He is NAR's New England political representative and serves as NAR's liaison to state and local associations, providing federal advocacy updates from Washington while managing RPAC's political and electoral activities across the 6 New England states. If Christian would like to say hello, good morning, good afternoon, Christian.
Hey, Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Congresswoman.
Good afternoon, Kristen. Great to be with you.
And finally, Congresswoman Kuster, thank you for accepting our invitation and taking this time out of your schedule. The Realtors are always very appreciative of your support with the causes and needs of Realtors and our buying and selling public. And we have some Realtor-related questions, some regarding the pandemic, some New Hampshire questions, Fair Housing Act, et cetera. So I'm going to start with one question. As you know, this pandemic has exhausted town budgets and other municipal resources. We are concerned that those shortfalls could result in diminished services or higher property taxes. Are there efforts in Congress to provide financial support to state or local governments so that essential services can continue without adding costs to property taxpayers?
Absolutely. That seems like a softball. So I think Joe might have written this one. No, seriously, the House. So let me try to break this down for people. We did the original CARES Act in a very bipartisan way back in March and got some critical aid out to the American people so that we didn't have an economic collapse on top of a public health crisis. And that was the funding of the stimulus payments, the first round of stimulus payments, the supplemental federal unemployment, $600 a week, and the PPP loans, the small business loans, which I don't know, but hopefully your members had access to. And I think that made a huge difference. But what we know is, and what your question implies, is that there's a reckoning coming down the road, because obviously there has been an impact on the economy from the COVID shutdown. And not only do cities and towns and states need to be reimbursed for the cost of responding to COVID, they also need to be reimbursed for lost revenue related to COVID. And in New Hampshire, the most obvious examples are at the state level, the rooms and meals tax. We had a 90% drop in hospitality and tourism, our number 2 sector of our economy. And the governor predicts that there will be a $500 million shortfall in our state budget, which is 20% of the total state budget. So, and at the local level, it's the lack of ability to pay for property taxes, people who lost their jobs. Now, luckily, I was on with the mayors just last week, and they said so far, that's only been about 2 to 3% of property taxes that were not paid in July, which is very, very good news. But I just got off the phone with housing advocates who are very concerned about evictions in the fall and people foreclosures and people, if we do not have another round of coronavirus stimulus. So where this stands is that in May, it's now over 2 months ago, the House passed what we call the HEROES Act. And that was another $3 trillion package that included the reimbursement to the states and to local cities and towns for this lost revenue from the COVID shutdown. And they're negotiating right now. The Republicans in the Senate do not want to spend those funds. They're very hung up on the White House is on blue states not benefiting, getting this funding. But look, we're all American, red states and blue states. And the bottom line is that now they're experiencing across the southern tier, the Sun Belt states, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, certainly Arizona, very, very high rates of COVID-19 and the economic impact that's coming with that. So I expect in the next few weeks, Speaker Pelosi will be able to negotiate on that point and that we will start to see some relief. I certainly hope that. I've been working with the governor behind the scenes for him to put pressure on his Republican colleagues in the Senate to come to the table to negotiate this relief.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you for that, Congresswoman. And then, of course, this year has seen an appropriate and long overdue re-examination on the impact of discrimination on our society. Unfortunately, real estate has played a role in that discrimination and on the housing disparity which exists today. The Fair Housing Act has gone a long way to resolving some issues, but we know there is still a long way to go. Can you share your thoughts on what needs to come next to ensure equality and opportunity for everyone, regardless of the color of our skin or sexual orientation?
Well, thank you, David. I really appreciate the question and the tenor of the question, because the truth is that all of us, everyone in every role in society, really needs to take a critical look at our role and the sector of the economy or the background that we might have. And I think you're right, spot on, that the history of redlining, not just realtors, but bankers in our society, has contributed to a lack of opportunity. And that exacerbates from one generation to the next to the next. I mean, if you just look at home ownership for communities of color, the amount of wealth accumulation, we all know. I mean, you're realtors, you know, you sell the American dream. That's what you sell. And certainly I can say for my husband and myself, we always say Merrimack County owns our home, and we appreciate that, the bank. But people accumulate their personal wealth and their family resources through home ownership. And the fact that that was not available or accessible, I think Cory Booker was just so impactful when he would tell his story campaigning here in New Hampshire about his own family. And recently I was having a conversation with community leaders in the Black community in Nashua, and our own state senator, Melanie LeVake, told me a very, very similar story, which is that her family moved to Nashua. Her father was going to work at Digital back then, big tech company, big employer, and they couldn't purchase a home. This is in the 1960s when Melanie was a girl. And his white colleagues in the company who wanted him to come work there bought the home and sold it back to him. And that's very similar. Cory's story is that a white lawyer went to sign the purchase and sale agreement, and then his parents showed up at the closing because they would not sell the property to them in New Jersey. So I think what we need to do is, first of all, make sure that our public policy, our federal housing policy, that we remove any trace of discrimination from all of the statutes but we have to go beyond that to the private sector. And I think we need to take a hard look at this. I mean, I'm open to learn more about it. Do we need incentives? Do we need, and let me just say, and I don't mean to be political on this call, but I do need to call out the president from being blatantly racist, actually invoking Cory Booker's name about the suburbs and the threat to the suburbs. Look, the suburbs across this country are much, much more brown. And right here in New Hampshire, if you look at communities like Nashua or Manchester or Concord, people moving to our state, whether it's African-American or Caribbean or Latino, Hispanic, refugee families, and we need to make sure that everyone has access to that slice of the American dream. We need to root out discrimination, make sure that we are a welcoming state and that our communities are welcoming communities.
Thank you very much. A lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah, but thank you for the question. It's important. And, you know, if we need to educate ourselves and educate the community about this, I would be honored to work with you and to think through what would that look like? I mean, first of all, is there a legislative component, working with Joe and your team on, do we need to make changes to policy? I think come January, we'll have an opportunity for that. I'm hopeful. And we could make sure that whatever is happening in federal housing policy and federal lending policy does not exacerbate the situation. But then what will it take in terms of leadership to go back to these communities and make sure that people feel welcome? It's not just the lending and the policies, it's how do people feel about whether they are welcome in our community, welcome in our state, welcome in our neighborhoods.
Thank you. Before I ask the next question, I'd like to remind people who are listening, they can add a question in the chat section and we'll try to get to it. I have a few more and I'll have another one right now here. Congresswoman, New Hampshire is experiencing its lowest inventory of housing in history. I work with people all the time who want to stay in New Hampshire but cannot find adequate, affordable housing. We recognize many of these issues are local, but is there anything on a federal level which can be done to expand housing opportunities in New Hampshire?
Well, absolutely. And just before this Zoom event, I was on with housing advocates at the New Hampshire Housing Trust and New Hampshire Legal Assistance and the CAP communities. One of the things we need to do is make sure we have accessible, affordable housing for everyone in the community. And I think what that will do is sort of improve the opportunity all the way up through the socioeconomic levels or layers of people seeking housing. If we have strong, safe, adequate, affordable housing, and we can do more to bring federal funding in, to incentivize the private sector. Some of my favorite projects have been to go around to the ground makings and the ribbon cuttings on affordable housing projects. We did one just recently last year in Claremont that's very exciting because it's downtown, so it's going to help rejuvenate a downtown area of Claremont, but it's also going to be much more accessible for people, much easier for people to walk to do their shopping or walk to a restaurant and really make a difference. And I went to that directly from an event at the Domestic Violence Rape Crisis Center that was walking distance away, because we have a lot of women and families in New Hampshire that are fleeing violence and need a safe, adequate place to live. And so there's a real connection there. We also did an incredible project with federal funds up in Plymouth, West Plymouth, that we were involved in for a number of years. It's housing for veterans, which I'm super excited about. It's called Boulder Point. And it's definitely one of the best projects I've worked on since I was in Congress. It took a long time. I think you alluded to this, but there are some local barriers to affordable housing. Alex Ray and the entrepreneur and some local advocates had been working on that project for a number of years, and they were turned down by several communities, even veteran housing. But now it's just a fantastic place with safe, affordable, clean, brand new apartments where veterans and their families can really thrive and be able to get the healthcare that they need in a reasonable way, and to get work that they need that's actually walking distance from some job opportunities. So I think that's a big part of it. And then, the rest is really incentivizing the private sector. Keeping interest rates low definitely helps. I think that's one of the things that's driving this market that we're in right now. I also think that we've got a lot of people moving in. They realize that New Hampshire is a safe place. Our COVID count now is very, very low. Over the weekend, it was 8 new cases, Joe, on Sunday. Granted, it was on the weekend and people don't get as many tests, But even, for the past several weeks, we've had a number of days that were in the low double digits. And so you see people moving up, some of them to their second homes, but getting their kids in school here, planning to stay, and some of them putting some pressure on looking to buy. I know you've got a very hot market. When I talk to my realtor friends, they say, if you have an open house, you've got several offers on the table by the time it's over, and whoever is the highest over the asking price is the one that's going to get in the house. But I think we've got to incentivize the building of homes as well. And by the way, renovations and reconstruction of older homes. I know New Hampshire has a lot of older home stock, and we can do more with the tax code to incentivize energy improvements. And we do a lot of work on renewable energy and energy improvements, both energy conservation and renewable energy projects. I think we can put more of our built housing stock back into the market in a rejuvenated way. That would probably go a long way to help you have more of an inventory. Because I know right now it's so tight, you all are just frantic with the phone calls, but you can barely make enough off, you could have a higher volume, I guess I would say it that way.
It's interesting. A lot of the old Victorians and a lot of the downtowns, Keene and other Peterborough, they become attorney offices and dentists and even real estate offices. And it'd be nice to see them turned into multi-family or two-family homes that are right downtown, and a lot of old infrastructure that's usable in that way.
One of the most successful builders in Concord he's a friend of ours who started out his career practicing law, but it turned out he had a higher calling, and he has done fantastic renovations of big, old, beautiful Victorians where he gets 3 or 4 condominiums out of it. And it's fantastic. It's perfect. People my age that want a smaller, they're ready to downsize. They like being closer to town where they can walk, but beautiful. I mean, we have a friend living in one of these, and the molding and the fireplaces and the turrets and all this fantastic features, but with a brand new kitchen and, a nice accessible bath. And I think there's a big opportunity there. And you're right, law offices are fine, but they don't need to be in the nicest housing stock in town.
I'm going to switch to a question from Joshua Greenwald from Greenwald Realty in Keene. It says, what are your thoughts on the previous moratorium on evictions and foreclosures and any future ones? The concern over the effect it has on landlords seems largely absent.
Right, I totally agree with you. And I think, let me just say, I'm in the camp that I want to help tenants and landlords. So what I believe to be true is that Congress needs to put our money where our mouth is. When we say there's an eviction on, that there's a moratorium on eviction, we need to put some money behind that. It doesn't help anyone to just stretch this out. I was just on that phone call with the housing advocates talking about this. If there's not funding behind it, then you're just going to see a world of hurt the other direction. The landlords, the vendors to the landlords, the property taxes for the landlords, you're just going to have a bunch of unpaid bills going the other way. By the same token, I am extremely concerned about the impact on our society, frankly, of a whole raft of evictions. These people have no place to go in New Hampshire. I mean, if you think inventory is tight for you, trust me, inventory is tight for anybody on a fixed budget trying to find housing in the state of New Hampshire for under $1,000 a month. It just doesn't exist out there. An apartment with several children or a multi-generational, we've got much more people living that way, where you have 4 or 5 people living together in a multi-generational configuration. So I'm extremely concerned now that this moratorium has been lifted, as we head into the school year, as we head into the fall and the winter, kids are not going back to school. Even here in Concord, we literally have one case of COVID at Concord Hospital, and the entire Concord schools have decided not to reopen because they can't keep every single person safe. And, you know, that's a decision that's been made. People will live with it, but a lot of families are not going to be able to go back to work. Maybe one parent can, or they can try to juggle part-time jobs. But we're going to have a ripple impact, and we're going to have, as I say, a world of hurt from evictions coming up. And the problem is, we're not going to solve anybody's problem that way. You know, we're just going to have a bunch of homeless families and kids on the streets, literally no place to go. And the landlords aren't going to be getting paid either, you know? And so I think what we really need to do is put the funding behind it. I want the speaker to be able to negotiate an agreement. Our HEROES bill that we passed, as I said, back in May from the House, included a continuation of the unemployment. That's been a critical link. That's why we haven't seen people be evicted until now, because their rents have been paid. I want to make sure people get another stimulus payment. I think that would be very helpful in the economy. And I want to make sure that we continue the Paycheck Protection Program and continue to save small businesses, because 90% of the people in New Hampshire work in small businesses. You look at the S&P 100 today, it's skyrocketing. The Dow Jones is skyrocketing. That's because those are big multinational corporations, the Walmarts, the Home Depot, the Lowe's. I mean, everybody's doing great projects on their house. Meanwhile, hardware stores, small businesses closing their doors. And we've got to try to save, you know, and whether it's Peterborough or Keene or Claremont, it's small business downtown that keeps your economy and your community thriving. So I want to see Speaker Pelosi prevail in this negotiation. And look, as I said, all across the South, they're just now getting to the height of this COVID pandemic. You know, for us, we're coming down the other side. Hopefully we can maintain that. We wear masks, with social distancing, contact tracing, testing. You know, we've thrown everything at it and gotten a handle on it. But the rest of the country needs these programs. And I think that we need them to continue so that we don't have a raft of evictions. It's all tied together. Sorry, the answers are a little long.
That's okay. Actually, you covered two questions in one, so that was very, very good. I have a few more, but before that, I think when I was chatting with Dean earlier, had a question. Do you I put you on the spot, Dean?
Oh, no problem. I wrote it down. Yeah,
Hey,
I
Dean.
do. Hey, how are you? Thank you for joining us this morning.
Sure, great to be with you.
So obviously with the COVID and the working remotely and now possibly learning remotely, a lot of our communities are really struggling with high-speed internet and still
Yes.
seem to be doing so. And a couple of questions are like, what is the state doing and where can towns go for help? Because literally I have a friend that bought a home and it's literally down the street. And then they want $3,000 to go from one telephone pole to another just so he can have internet service. So are there things in place and programs where towns can benefit and really help? Because I see this being a huge concern with the opportunity now to be able to even work remotely.
Absolutely. So a number of things, and this has been a priority of mine from the get-go, but even more so now, if you look at working from home, schooling from home, telehealth. I had my first telehealth appointment this week, and it's amazing. It's a game changer. I think, again, there will be pre-COVID, post-COVID aspects to our lives, but post-COVID is much more of our life will be online. And the convenience of that, you know, it's quite extraordinary. So I've been participating as a member of our majority whip, Mr. Clyburn, that we were referring to from South Carolina, has been the chair of a bipartisan rural broadband task force that I've been involved with for a number of months. And We did get some funding into the CARES Act. We got even more funding into our HEROES Act that we're trying to negotiate right now. And one of the things we have to do is we have to make a change. Again, the timing of all these programs, this was back in March when we thought this was going to be, we were all working from home for a few weeks, right? Don't you remember that feeling? We go, oh my God, week 5, I can't believe I'm still here. Well, we're going to, we're past month 5 now. But we had a deadline on when those funds had to be used. So here in New Hampshire, the governor had took those federal funds, created a broadband relief program, if you will. And but the downside is the projects that they considered had to be completed by December 30, 2020. And so there were very few. I think he started out, the goal was $35 million, and there were only $16 million that even fit that description, that could, literally shovel ready to be completed in just a few months. So what we're working on now, and I should have introduced from the beginning, Aaron Cotton is from my Concord office and Will Pisano from my DC office. And Will is working on, with the speaker's office, on making sure that that deadline gets pushed out so that the projects can be much longer and that we can use the rest of this funding. I know I've been to all of your communities and looked at broadband issues in Keene, certainly in Peterborough and Claremont. Some of the smaller towns in between. Southwest New Hampshire is particularly challenging. The geography is that you have situations where in Keene and others where broadband first came in, but everybody didn't get it. And now it's hard to convince those companies to come back and hook up the people that are more expensive, that are further away, like your friend. And so we've got to figure out funding that will create sufficient incentive to get those private companies to come back and hook up your friend and hook up the rest of the people. And for the most part, that will be broadband expansion. Some of the communities, some of the towns are getting involved with it themselves. If it's a really small town with, 200 or 300 residents, there's not enough of a customer base to convince a company to come in. And so you have seen some public-private partnerships over there in Cheshire County start to create incentives. To the state legislature passed some legislation last cycle. Jay Kahn, the senator from over in Keene, was very active in that, to create a type of sort of a structure, if you will, for the towns and the government entities to coordinate with the private entities and the incentives so that everybody will be working together to get every home in these communities on. It's a challenge, in hindsight, I think that we should approach it the way we did the rural electrification, which is that we just decided every home in America should be hooked up to a telephone. They didn't used to have a telephone. And we decided for public safety, for democracy, for community engagement, for families, there's any number of reasons. Some of them related to the economy and commerce, and some of them related to democracy and our society. And to me, in 2020, the same case can be made for what we're doing right now. Otherwise, we couldn't be together, and now here we are. We're together having this meeting. It's going smoothly. We're all participating, and we need everybody to be in on that. And what I worry, and let me just say this, that I worry, similar to the housing, the least capable amongst us will be the ones that will suffer. One of the issues we talked about on the housing call is that they had over 4,000 people inquire about low-income housing assistance during COVID. They lost their jobs. They needed a place, they needed some help to pay the rent. And the plan from the governor's office is that all of these applications would be done online because everybody's at home and completed online. Like, how simple could that be? But the presumption, the privilege that's behind that assumption, the reality is people didn't have access. And that whittled down from 4,000 inquiries to a little over 400 applications completed, because either through the geography they didn't have access, or more likely they couldn't afford the technology or the broadband monthly payments. So if you multiply that out in telehealth, in education, there are some communities where 25–30% of the kids aren't showing up. What does that do to our society going forward? And luckily here in New Hampshire, there are cable companies that really stepped up. And I was on a call a few weeks ago. One of the companies had literally hooked up 300 families. They were working with the school system to identify who are the kids that are not showing up, and contacting the family, and is that the reason? And this cable company had hooked them up at no charge and paid for 3 months of cable to get them through the end of the year so that these kids could get their education. So we've got, COVID had a way of pulling back the curtain on some of the underlying challenges in our society. And I think my goal is that going forward, we resolve the challenges from COVID, but we work on what we saw and what we learned and how we can provide greater opportunity to everyone. So thank you. I know it's a big issue for realtors. It comes up every time, right, David, when we meet?
Oh, yes.
Peterborough, and the realtors say to me, they have, they've got $300,000–400,000 homes, and they can't sell them because there's no internet. So.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, and I agree with you. I think, and that's my concern, is the problem is going to get bigger moving forward now because of kids needing to educate remotely.
Right. Right.
It's almost like the -- question used to be, how are the schools? Now it's, can I get high-speed internet? So
yeah,
thank you today for that. That was great.
Yeah. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one particular program that is helpful, and Aaron can follow up with you. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, of all places, that's where a lot of the rural policy happens in Washington. And I've been very involved because I spent 6 years on the Ag Committee. They have been very helpful with funding for rural broadband projects in some of these communities. And it may be that we can help connect you. And also the governor is really focused on this as well. So there may be funding from that, the federal funding that came through the state fund, particularly if we can push back the date of that. And I think we will, by the way. I think we'll be successful in that.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for all that. And Dean, good question. Thanks. And I have a big B on my forehead every time you see me, Congresswoman, that I talk about broadband. So.
Yeah, rightly so. I mean, look at, it would be the equivalent of, these families not having an automobile. Mm-hmm. Like, how would they function if we had, I don't know what the percentage is statewide, but it's going to be somewhere 5 to 10% of New Hampshire families, I would think, can't have access. Imagine those families without an automobile. It's not possible. And so right now in this COVID era, it's really, really very challenging.
I have a couple more questions, but before that, I don't know if Bill or Bob or even Dean or some other people listening in to ask questions in the Q&A in the chat section. I have one early on in the crisis. One of Governor Sununu's emergency orders here in New Hampshire, which has proven to be very helpful in the real estate industry, has to do with allowing remote notarization.
Yes.
I know there is an effort in Congress to expand access to remote online notarization with certain minimum standards. This is critical to realtors, and do you see this bill passing this year?
I'm going to send that one down to Joe, because I do not know if that, I'm sure I approve of it. I'm happy to help, but I don't know the answer as to whether it's moving. Can we get it moving?
Yeah, on the House side, we've had a lot more success than we have had on the Senate side, and I think that's the issue. There have been one or two senators who, for whatever reason, have felt uncomfortable with some of them. They feel uncomfortable with superseding state law, which they feel is a lot more robust. But we have been sort of playing up this idea that this is only temporary. This only goes so long as the national emergency declaration and provides immediate relief for everyday transactions that have to be notarized. Now, what's ended up happening is a lot of states, in fact, most states, have gone ahead and implemented emergency remote online notarization through the state legislature or through government or through the governor's executive order, something along those lines. But we found the going very tough on the federal side, and I think it has a lot to do with state preemption.
Yeah, states' rights. As soon as you started asking the question, that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
I mean, look, this is another example, though, I think, of we have the same situation on telehealth. There's a emergency reimbursement by Medicare and Medicaid for telehealth appointments. But then suddenly you demonstrate, you prove to everybody, oh my God, what were we holding back? Why were we running around looking for live notaries? And what a waste of, kind of friction on the system that is. And the same with this telehealth. I'm working very hard to continue the reimbursement so that we can take the lessons learned from COVID and head into the 21st century here in a much more modern world. And so that may be one of the examples. And by the way, if you can get all 50 states to do it, the federal government's dragging their feet. Who cares at that point? But I think maybe in the new Congress, we could get a different attitude toward that this is modernization. This is good for the economy. It's good for realtors and for families looking to buy homes and sell homes. And let's move on. I've said this a number of times during COVID. My generation was holding these things back. I mean, let's be honest. You talk to physicians, they'd never done a single telehealth appointment. They did 200 of them in the first week and said, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, this works fine. And it was just my generation was so resistant to the change that poor Will and Aaron's generation were going to have to wait for us all to die before we, and look at us now. I mean, we caught on. So I think that kind of thing could be a change that could end up happening because we've demonstrated that it makes sense.
Thank you.
David, I'll just note I spoke with Bob Quinn, Government Affairs Director for the New Hampshire Association of Realtors. I believe the realtors and the mortgage bankers are beginning discussions and planning for trying to enact permanent remote online notarization heading into the next year's legislative session at the state level. So while we're obviously pushing on the federal level, there will be an effort at the state level as well.
Yeah, and maybe New Hampshire can lead the way and we can demonstrate. You start to have those kinds of examples, there's going to be a lot less resistance. And I think what Joe's talking about, this is, there's certain people, by the way, until Bush v. Gore, but there were certain people that feel very, very strongly about state rights. And this is just symbolic to them. They're not looking at the actual issue.
It's interesting to see how many traditions of sorts have worked out just fine. The big closing ceremonies around the big table a lot of them happening remotely now, and they're quite successful. We missed the in-person approach, but Plan B seems to be working with that, and we hope with the notary situation it will as well.
Well, one thing I just heard this morning, the remote internet conventions, you know, national party conventions, that everybody held their breath. They had just didn't think it would fly at all. And it turns out there are, I think, close to 10 million more people watching it than have ever watched it before. So, I mean, some of these things we're going to realize, oh, not only is it more convenient, but people prefer it this way in their pajamas from the couch.
Yeah. Getting close to the end, I don't have another question. I don't know if anybody else on our panel has one, or open up to the folks listening in on the boards throughout the district, or Kristen or Joe, and anybody like to chime in, or just in general, Congresswoman, any comments for us? Any questions you have of us?
Well, I was just wrapping up thinking about one of the reasons I'm fond of Joe because he's such a nice person, but I'm fond of the concept of realtors and the role that you do play in our society of helping families have a home. You know, it's pretty basic. And right now we're all spending a lot more time in our home than we ever thought we would. I remember back in March, I was so excited the first day I was going to work at home. I said, oh, this is awesome. I could go for a walk and have lunch with my husband. And I got to tell you, I've never worked so hard in my entire life as I did from the middle of March till the 1st of August. It's challenging. You know, we're all juggling a lot. I don't even have little kids at home. I mean, I have 8 nieces, 6 of them have little kids at home. So I'm hearing a lot about it. But this is a very, very challenging time in our society. And I really appreciate not just the role that you play, but sort of the importance of that concept of community and creating community and building community. And I really appreciate the question that you asked about diversity and what's your role in that? What can realtors do? What can bankers do? My background, I'm a lawyer for 25 years. You know, we should hire more Black lawyers in New Hampshire. We don't. And the question is why? And we all have got to ask ourselves that. And so I'd love to work with you on that. I care a great deal. I'm learning so much about New Hampshire being a different kind of place. And just end by saying I was hiking over the weekend up north, and it's very, very crowded. The trails are very, very busy. People are getting outdoors and they're loving New Hampshire. But I had never in my entire lifetime seen such an unbelievably diverse group of people, big families, multi-generational, Asian, Indian American, Hispanic, just loving it. Carrying their dog right to the top of the mountain. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, kids in flip-flops making it to the top of the mountain. I mean, just different, you know, they hadn't been there before. They hadn't seen it. And they were so excited. And we live in a beautiful place. We're blessed. We're safer than the rest of the country and the rest of the world right now. But we can share that. You know, and you're the people that are welcoming people into a better opportunity and into our communities. And I really appreciate the face that you give that and the approach, the values that you lead with. So we're here to help you. We're here to be supportive, and anything that we can do to make the regulations less onerous and the rules of the road more better incentivize the sale of real estate, we're happy to help. Thanks for everything that you do.
I want to thank everybody involved in setting this up, Erin and Will and Sarah. I didn't give you much of an intro, but you're all part of Congresswoman Kuster's staff. Thank you very much. And Joe and Christian for joining us, and the board presidents who were able to make it, and the participation was great. I really appreciate all of you. And Congresswoman, thank you for all your support once again. I hope we can all meet in person sometime again.
I sure hope so. The sooner the better.
Those roundtables were quite well received, and we enjoyed having you. So
good.
Well, there are no other questions.
2021.
I hope so.
I should add this too, that I'm on the health subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee. So we're having a lot of discussions about the vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine. And we now have 7 companies that are have very promising research going on. A number of them, I think 3 or 4 are already in the stage 3 trials, which is the human trials with 30,000 people testing. And we have heard from Dr. Fauci and Dr. Redfield and others that by the end of 2020 or the beginning of 2021, we should start to see that vaccine rolling out. There may be a couple of choices in the end. And what I'm working on is the equitable distribution to make sure that everybody has access, communities of color, rural communities, seniors, certainly our frontline healthcare workers. And so hopefully when that all happens, we will get a chance to be together again soon.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Stay
Thank
safe.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Congresswoman.
everybody.
Thanks,
Great to
everyone.
see you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, David. Bye-bye.